The alarm didn't so much wake me as confirm I was still alive, which on chemo days was always a 50-50 proposition. I felt like a sack of wet cement someone had vaguely shaped into a human form. Another Tuesday, I muttered to the ceiling. Another date with the poison that's saving my life. Lucky me. My joints ached, my stomach was doing a nervous little jig, and my hair was staging a mass exodus. The joys of battling the big C? They never tell you about the sheer unadulterated glamour. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Sal. Outside when you're ready, champ. Brought you a ginger ale. Sal was my medical taxi guy, a saint in a slightly battered Crown Victoria. He always called me champ. Probably called all his chemo passengers champ. Still, it was nice. Getting ready was an Olympic event. Each sock felt like a marathon. The button on my jeans? Everest. I glanced in the mirror. Pale, a bit gaunt, but there was still a spark in there. A very tired, very annoyed spark. Showtime, Mikey, I told my reflection. Let's go get juiced. I made it out the front door, into the blessedly gray morning. Sal was there, leaning against his cab, a small paper bag in his hand. Looking, radiant, Mikey, he said, his eyes crinkling. Sal had a way of making even the bleakest pronouncements sound cheerful. Feeling it, Sal, feeling it, I said, managing a weak grin. He handed me the bag. The cool condensation of the ginger ale bottle was a small mercy. I shuffled into the back seat, the familiar scent of stale coffee and industrial-strength air freshener weirdly comforting. Sal started the engine. To the Hall of Healing, then. And that's when she appeared, like a malevolent garden gnome materializing from the petunias. Brenda. Arms crossed, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, and a look on her face that could curdle milk. Her yappy little terror of a dog, something Princess Fluffybutt, yapped at her heels, a tiny, furious ball of fluff. "Hold it right there, mister!" Brenda's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. She'd planted herself directly in front of Sal's taxi. Sal braked. "Morning, Brenda. Bit early for traffic enforcement, isn't it?" Brenda ignored him, her gaze fixed on some imaginary infraction. "This vehicle," she announced, tapping her clipboard with a pen, "is not authorized for commercial pickups within Pleasant Vista's residential zones between 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. on Tuesdays. It's in the bylaws, Section 4, Subsection B, Paragraph 3. Part?" Sal leaned out the window. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a medical transport. I'm taking him to chemotherapy. You know Mr. Henderson? Mikey? Lives right there?" He gestured towards my house. Brenda scoffed, a sound like air escaping a punctured tire. "That's what they all say. I've heard medical emergency for everything from Amazon deliveries to a rogue squirrel. Rules are rules. You'll have to move along or arrange pickup outside the perimeter." The perimeter was a good quarter-mile walk, something I wasn't sure I could manage without collapsing or throwing up, or possibly both simultaneously. I leaned forward, the effort making my head swim. "Lady," I said, my voice weaker than I wanted, "I really don't have time for this. I need to get to the hospital." "And I," she shot back, her eyes glittering with the thrill of absolute, petty power, "really don't have time for people who think the rules don't apply to them. Pleasant Vistas has standards." She puffed her chest out. Princess Fluffybutt yipped in agreement. "I have cancer," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "This isn't a joyride." Brenda peered at me, her head tilted. "Well, you look perfectly capable of walking to the main gate, if it's that important. A little fresh air might do you good. Besides, are you even parked in an HOA-approved waiting zone, driver?" She turned her attention back to Sal, who looked like he was about to spontaneously combust. Are you serious? Sal sputtered. He just told you? I am always serious when it comes to the integrity of Pleasant Vistas, Brenda declared. She actually puffed her chest out. Now, are you going to comply, or do I need to call Mr. Henderson's landlord about unauthorized commercial activity emanating from his property? My landlord was her brother-in-law. Of course he was. The wave of nausea I'd been fighting intensified. The dull ache behind my eyes pulsed. I just couldn't fight her. Not then. Sal, I sighed, slumping back against the seat. Just take me around the block, the long way. Please, I can't do this right now. Sal looked at me, his face a mixture of pity and outrage, then back at Brenda. He bit back whatever he was going to say, put the car in reverse, and began the slow, humiliating crawl backward. Brenda smirked, a small, triumphant twitch of her lips. A wise decision. Compliance is always appreciated. She made a little shooing motion with her hand, as if dismissing a bothersome fly. In the taxi, as we took the scenic, infuriating detour out of Pleasant Vistas, I was a cauldron of silent fury and utter exhaustion. She had no idea who I was, what I did for a living. Or maybe she just didn't care. Some people derive their entire sense of self-worth from the crumbs of power they can lord over others. Brenda was clearly feasting. Some people just got a stick so far up there, Sal muttered, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I just nodded, too tired to even complete his sentence. My world, for the past 6 months, had been a blur of appointments, scans, blood tests, and the ever-present metallic taste of chemo. My job, my actual paying job, was Director of Hospital Transportation for the entire City Central Hospital network. I manage a fleet of hundreds of vehicles, ambulances, patient transport vans, critical care units, mobile imaging labs, even the goddamn helicopter. I deal with actual emergencies, with people whose minutes, whose seconds count. I orchestrate the daily chaotic ballet of getting sick people where they need to be, often under immense pressure. And this woman, this curator of crabgrass, this gardener of grievances, thought blocking a chemo ride for a cheap thrill was a legitimate use of her time. I remembered a particularly brutal day a few months back before my diagnosis. A major gas line explosion downtown. Streets closed, gridlock, hospitals on divert. We had 3 critical cardiac patients needing transfer to our specialist unit, a premature baby needing NICU, and a transplant organ on ice with a ticking clock. My team and I were in the command center, a cacophony of ringing phones and radio chatter. For 6 straight hours, we rerouted, rescheduled, cajoled, and outright bullied city officials to get our vehicles through. We made it work. Every patient got where they needed to be. The surgeon for the transplant even called me personally to say we'd saved that organ by minutes. That was my world. Logistics, pressure, consequences, and Brenda. Brenda had her bylaws and her clipboard. A small, grim smile touched my lips. It was a truly terrible smile, the kind that promises future inconvenience. She picked the wrong guy. The spectacularly wrong guy. At the hospital, Dr. Ramirez took one look at me. "Rough morning, Mikey. You look like you wrestled a badger and lost." "You have no idea, Doc," I said, settling into the chemo chair. "Let's just say the neighborhood watch is getting a little overzealous. Tell me, is there a medical code for acute HOA-induced aggravation?" Dr. Ramirez chuckled. "Not yet, but give it time. Some of those meetings sound more stressful than surgery." As the IV dripped its life-saving, body-wrecking cocktail into my arm, the idea began to percolate. It was a tiny, vindictive seed. but in the fertile ground of my chemo-addled, righteously indignant brain, it started to sprout. Brenda liked rules. She liked order. She liked her precious, pleasant vistas to run like a well-oiled, albeit soul-crushingly dull machine. Fine. I knew a thing or two about making things run, and a thing or two about making them not run. I pulled out my phone, my fingers feeling clumsy. I speed-dialed Maria, my assistant. My rock. "Maria, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice low. "I need a little favor. Nothing official. Just some information gathering." "Mikey." Her voice was instantly alert. "Are you feeling okay? You sound like you're plotting something. Something fun, I hope. Because that new intern, bless his heart, just tried to schedule a non-emergency patient transfer using the critical care helicopter because, and I quote, it seemed faster." I managed a weak laugh. "This might be more subtly fun, Maria. I need you to find out everything you can about the Pleasant Vistas HOA. Specifically, one Brenda last name. Her schedule, any official HOA duties, preferred contractors, upcoming sanctioned events, the works. Discretion is key." There was a pause. Then I could almost hear the grin in her voice. "Consider it done, boss. Is this related to your radiant glow this morning?" Sal must have texted her. "Oh, it'll be fun, Maria," I said, the grim smile returning. "Educational, even. For some." A few days crawled by. The chemo hangover subsided into a dull throb of general malaise, which was an improvement. I was starting to feel less like a victim and more like a logistician with a vendetta. Maria, true to her word, was a veritable intelligence agency. "Okay, so," she said over the phone, her voice brimming with barely suppressed glee. "Brenda hosts a beautification committee meeting every Thursday at 10 a.m. at her house. They use a landscaping service called Petal Pushers, Inc. No, I am not making that up. And they come every Friday morning like clockwork. And get this, Mikey, this is gold. She's currently spearheading a petition to install new, aesthetically superior speed bumps. Apparently, the current ones lack artistic merit. Rumor has it she wants them modeled on the Matterhorn." I choked on my lukewarm tea. "The Matterhorn? Is she planning to install a ski lift, too?" "Wouldn't put it past her," Maria said. "She also has a running feud with Mrs. Henderson from 2 streets over about the precise shade of beige approved for mailbox posts. Beige, Mikey. The woman is a connoisseur of colorless conflict." This was too good. Brenda, with her iron-fisted rule over petunia placements and speed bump aesthetics, was about to encounter a different kind of order. My kind. Years of battling city permits for ambulance loading zones, coordinating road closures for hospital wing constructions, and untangling snarled transport schedules caused by everything from presidential motorcades to rogue pigeon flocks had taught me a thing or two about creative routing. Friday morning arrived, crisp and full of promise. Sal, bless his enabling heart, picked me up. "Just for moral support, Mikey," he said, handing me a coffee. "And maybe some popcorn. This feels like a spectator sport." We parked down the street from Brenda's house, a perfect vantage point. Right on schedule, the Petal Pushers Inc. van trundled into view. I took a deep breath, pulled out a cheap burner phone I'd acquired for this very purpose, and dialed their office. Time for a little logistical redirection. "Petal Pushers, how can I help you?" A bored-sounding voice answered. "Yeah, hi," I said, putting on my best imitation of a slightly flustered, entitled older gentleman. I'd decided to impersonate Brenda's husband, Harold, a name Maria had unearthed. Harold, apparently, was a man whose primary hobby was competitive birdwatching and avoiding his wife. "This is Harold, Brenda's husband, from 123 Primrose Path. Quick change of plans for today's service. Urgent." Okay, Mr. Last Name. What's up? Brenda's in a bit of a tizzy, I continued, injecting a note of weary resignation. We need you to focus exclusively on the prize-winning petunias by the main HOA gate today. She said something about a mutant aphid infestation? Highly contagious. And listen carefully, this is critical. Under no circumstances are you to go near her prize-winning rose bushes by the house. She's doing a special, very delicate organic treatment herself today, and any interference could be catastrophic. She was very specific. Catastrophic. Mutant aphids on the petunias. Don't touch the roses. Got it. Anything else? Yes, actually, I said, as if just remembering. That large delivery of organic mulch. Brenda wants it dropped at Mrs. Higgins' place, number 45 Tulip Terrace. She's sharing it with her this week. Said Mrs. Higgins will know what to do with it. Mrs. Higgins was, according to Maria, Brenda's arch-nemesis in the ongoing Great Mailbox Beige War. We watched, barely containing our snorts, as the pedal pushers crew, looking thoroughly confused, descended upon the HOA gate petunias with military precision, giving Brenda's prize rose bushes a wide, almost fearful berth. Then, the mulch truck arrived, and proceeded to dump a veritable mountain of dark, steaming mulch directly onto Mrs. Higgins' impeccably manicured, award-winning, and distinctly non-beige lawn. The ensuing explosion was glorious. Brenda came storming out of her house, clipboard flapping, Princess Fluffybutt, a tiny, yapping tornado at her ankles. "My roses!" we heard her shriek, even from our distance. "What are you doing? I said the geraniums needed the aphid protocol, and who authorized this mulch monstrosity on Mildred Higgins' lawn?" The poor pedal pushers guys just looked bewildered. One of them pointed a thumb back towards the main gate. "But the mutant aphids, and Mr. Last Name said—" Sal was wiping tears from his eyes. "Mikey, you're a menace. A beautiful, beautiful menace." "Just a little proactive problem-solving, Sal," I said, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the coffee. Efficiency is key in any complex system. Next on the agenda, Brenda's almost fanatical devotion to her perfectly hydrated, unnaturally green lawn. Maria's intel included the name of the HOA's approved irrigation specialists, Aquafix Sprinklers. Another call from Harold was in order. "Aquafix, Bob speaking." "Bob, hi. Harold Last Name here. 123 Primrose. Listen, the timer on our sprinkler system is completely shot. It's possessed. Going off at like 3 a.m., then again at noon, then randomly during the evening news. Woke Brenda up 3 times last night. She's displeased. Said something about it disturbing the nocturnal dew patterns, and if it's not fixed ASAP, there'll be hell to pay. Can you get someone out here? Early tomorrow, maybe? Before she, fully awakens?" "Disturbing the dew patterns, huh?" Bob sounded like he'd heard it all. "Yeah, we can squeeze you in. 6 a.m. work for you." "Perfect," I said. "She'll be thrilled." The next morning, Sal, ever the dedicated co-conspirator, drove me by Brenda's house at a snail's pace around 7 a.m. The scene was even better than I'd hoped. An Aquafix van was parked haphazardly on the curb. A very soggy, very disgruntled-looking plumber was engaged in a heated, gesticulating argument with Brenda, who was wearing a fluffy pink bathrobe and pointing furiously at her lawn, which now resembled a small rice paddy. It appeared the plumber, attempting to diagnose the faulty system in the pre-dawn gloom, had received an unexpected and thorough drenching when the perfectly functional sprinklers had, indeed, gone off on their regular 6:30 a.m. cycle. "Hydration is so important for a healthy lawn, wouldn't you agree, Sal?" I murmured, as we cruised past the tableau of suburban waterlogged woe. Sal just shook his head, chuckling. Naturally, Brenda was convinced she was the victim of a sophisticated campaign of neighborhood terrorism. Her next call, predictably, was to the police. A couple of hours later, my doorbell rang. Detective Rodriguez stood on my porch, looking like he hadn't slept in a week and already regretted getting out of bed. Sal was in my kitchen, making us both some toast, having decided he was now my unofficial bodyguard getaway driver. "Mr. Henderson? Mikey?" Rodriguez consulted a small notepad. "We've had some unusual complaints from your HOA president, Miss Brenda last name." I summoned my best chemo patient too weak to plot anything expression. "Officer, please, come in. Forgive me if I don't get up. I've been so unwell. HOA business." It's the last thing on my mind, truly. Is Princess Fluffybutt okay? She didn't get into some bad kibble, did she? Rodriguez's lips twitched. "No, the dog is fine, sir. Miss Last Name is alleging sabotage, specifically regarding her landscaping services and a, sprinkler malfunction." Sal appeared in the kitchen doorway, holding a plate of slightly burnt toast. "Officer, with all due respect, Mikey here can barely make it to the kitchen for a glass of water, let alone orchestrate a county-wide sprinkler conspiracy. And that Brenda woman? She accused me of running a human trafficking ring last month because I had a cooler in my taxi for his ginger ale." Just then, as if summoned by the sheer power of her own indignation, Brenda herself appeared on my doorstep, Rodriguez having left the door ajar. She was practically vibrating with fury, her finger jabbing towards me. "It's him! He's doing this! I know he is! Just because I upheld the bylaws of Pleasant Vistas?" I looked at her, then at Rodriguez, my expression one of pained confusion. Upholding the bylaws? Officer, is that what she calls blocking a cancer patient from getting to his life-saving chemotherapy appointment? Because I have hospital records. Sal is a witness. I'm sure the hospital security cameras at the entrance caught my late arrival. Rodriguez's gaze shifted from Brenda's flushed, furious face to my pale but steady one. He let out a long, weary sigh, the sigh of a man who had seen too much pettiness in his career. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Brenda, "unless you have actual, concrete evidence of Mr. Henderson tampering with anything, and I mean actual evidence, not just suspicions, this sounds like a series of unfortunate coincidences and perhaps some significant miscommunications with your various service providers." Brenda started to sputter. "But the petunias, the mulch, the dew patterns." "I suggest everyone try to be good neighbors," Rodriguez said, his voice firm but tired. He gave me a long, unreadable look before he turned to leave, gently escorting a still protesting Brenda off my porch. "He knows," I said quietly to Sal, as Brenda's outraged squawks faded down the street. "Or he suspects something's not quite right." Sal took a bite of toast. "Yeah, but he also knows a fruitcake when he sees one, Mikey. You played the frail chemo patient card like a Vegas pro. Oscar-worthy performance." I was feeling a bit stronger. The small victories had been amusing, but Brenda's reign of clipboard terror was far from over. It was time for something a little more tangible. A monument to pettiness, if you will. Maria's research had indicated that while Brenda was obsessed with enforcing bylaws, her actual knowledge of them was sometimes selective, especially when it came to property lines and common area easements. I made a few calls and soon found myself face-to-face with Chad and Brad of C&B Creative Contracting. They were young, overwhelmingly enthusiastic, and wore matching neon green tool belts. "Gentlemen," I said, trying to look as serious and visionary as possible, "I have a very specific HOA-approved," I gave a subtle wink they completely missed, "landscaping project. We're installing a reflective pebble nocturnal safety garden along my front property line." "Whoa," Chad breathed, his eyes wide. "Reflective pebbles? That's like next gen. Indeed, I said. For, enhanced nocturnal pedestrian visibility and vital water conservation through strategic non-organic ground cover. I unrolled a rough sketch I'd made. It depicted a jagged, slightly menacing barrier of large, pointy white rocks interspersed with smaller, glittery pebbles. And it needs to be exactly on the property line, to the inch. Precision is paramount for the, feng shui. Brad pumped his fist. Rock on, Mr. Mikey. We love feng shui and precision. You got it? The work began the next day. It was loud, very loud. The clanging of shovels, the grating of rocks, Chad and Brad's cheerful, off-key singing, and, as I'd meticulously planned, the reflective pebble nocturnal safety garden was to the inch on my property line, but also managed to make the common area pathway next to it feel about 6 inches narrower and considerably more treacherous. Brenda was apoplectic. She was out there daily, a tape measure in one hand, her phone in the other, presumably on a direct line to a lawyer or possibly Satan. She took endless photos. She remonstrated with Chad and Brad, who just beamed at her with unshakable enthusiasm. This is a blatant violation of common area easement, she shrieked at Chad during one particularly loud rock placement session, and your reflective indices are not up to code for a Zone 3 residential pathway. Chad, bless his simple neon green heart, just scratched his head. Ma'am, Mr. Mikey gave us all the specs. Said it was all pre-approved with the HOA. He even mentioned something about a new harmonious rock and nocturnal luminescence initiative. I watched from my window, sipping chamomile tea, occasionally giving Chad and Brad an encouraging thumbs up. The Pebble Garden was truly a hideous, glorious masterpiece of passive-aggressive landscaping. It was so ugly, it was almost beautiful. Princess Fluffybutt seemed particularly offended by it, barking at the pointy rocks as if they might leap out and bite her. Brenda, predictably, called an emergency HOA meeting. The agenda? The escalating menace of Number 7 and the unauthorized proliferation of geologically questionable border installations. Or something to that effect. I was feeling markedly better. The latest chemo cycle had been less brutal. Or maybe my petty revenge schemes were having a therapeutic effect. I decided to attend. Sal, naturally, insisted on driving me. He parked his Crown Vic conspicuously and entirely legally right in front of the clubhouse, whistling a jaunty tune. Front row seats to the Brenda meltdown, he said. Better than pay-per-view. The clubhouse was buzzing with nervous energy. Brenda stood at a makeshift podium, her face a mask of righteous fury. She had a PowerPoint presentation. Oh, this was serious. Fellow residents of Pleasant Vistas, she began, her voice trembling with emotion. We are under siege. A campaign of terror, of blatant disrespect for the very bylaws that protect our property values and our way of life is being waged by that man. She pointed a dramatic finger in my general direction. I gave a weak, polite wave. Her PowerPoint was a masterpiece of paranoid delusion. Grainy photos of the pedal pusher's van suspiciously parked. A zoomed-in shot of a damp patch on her lawn, labeled Evidence of Aquatic Sabotage. Close-ups of my reflective pebble nocturnal safety garden, with angry red arrows pointing at particularly pointy rocks. This, she declared, her voice rising, is not just landscaping. This is a statement, a hostile, glittering act of aggression. Some residents murmured in agreement, mostly her known sycophants. Others looked profoundly bored or were subtly checking their phones. And then, as if on cue, a phone buzzed. Then another, and another. A collective ripple of electronic notification swept through the room. An anonymous email, you see, had just been dispatched to every single resident of Pleasant Vistas. An email I might have had a little something to do with. Maria, bless her tech-savvy, mischievous heart, had helped me draft it and had then routed it through so many encrypted, untraceable servers. It probably bounced off a satellite owned by a Bond villain. The email was a model of concise, factual concern. It detailed, with dates and times, Brenda's obstruction of my medical transport. It included a heavily redacted but official-looking copy of the relevant HOA bylaw about not impeding emergency or medical vehicles. It also contained snippets from past HOA minutes. Maria was a miracle worker at finding publicly almost available documents, showcasing Brenda's long history of petty complaints against various neighbors for infractions such as unharmonious wind chimes and excessively cheerful holiday decorations. The pièce de résistance was a scanned copy of a formal complaint, which looked incredibly official, complete with a file number and a very stern-looking, if slightly pixelated, city crest, filed with the City Health and Transportation Oversight Committee against the Pleasant Vistas HOA for obstruction of essential medical services. The email concluded with a simple, devastating question. Is this the kind of leadership Pleasant Vistas stands for? Perhaps it's time for a review of HOA presidential duties and conduct, ensuring they align with both our community values and city ordinances. The silence in the clubhouse was absolute. You could have heard a petunia drop. Then, a low murmur started, spreading through the room like a contagion. People weren't looking at Brenda with fear or agreement anymore. They were looking at her with dawning comprehension. Brenda, who had been mid-rant about the unacceptable angularity of my pebbles, faltered. Her face went from furious red to a startling blotchy white. What is this? This is slander! Lies! Who sent this? I just sat there, observing the beautiful, unfolding chaos, a small, serene smile playing on my lips. I might have even hummed a little. The unraveling was swift and deeply satisfying. The very next day, Pedal Pushers, Inc. formally notified Brenda that, due to numerous anonymous complaints regarding client communication and service alteration protocols, all future landscaping requests for her property would require a formal written submission, co-signed by another board member, with a minimum of 72 business hours notice. No exceptions. Aquafix Sprinklers sent her a rather pointed bill for the emergency after-hours diagnostic and due pattern consultation, with a highlighted addendum stating that future non-emergency call-outs to her address would be subject to a significant inconvenience surcharge. Chad and Brad, bless their enthusiastic hearts, finished the reflective pebble nocturnal safety garden. It was, if I did say so myself, magnificently hideous. They even added a little plaque, Pleasant Vistas Harmony Project, courtesy of Amshaw Henderson and C&B Creative Contracting. They told Brenda, with genuine pride, "Mr. Mikey said you'd absolutely love the positive energy flow this generates, ma'am. It's totally feng shui-tastic." Princess Fluffybutt took one look at it, whimpered, and hid under Brenda's azaleas. More importantly, several HOA board members, armed with copies of the anonymous email and fielding a barrage of calls from suddenly very concerned residents, formally called for a special session to discuss Miss Brenda Lastname's recent conduct and its impact on community cohesion and potential legal liabilities. The cherry on top, however, arrived a few days later in the form of two very official-looking city vehicles pulling up to the Pleasant Vistas clubhouse. One belonged to a city zoning inspector. The other, to my immense and poorly concealed delight, bore the insignia of the Regional Health Transport Oversight Board. It turned out my formal complaint, which Maria had made look so terrifyingly official, even if its actual legal teeth were more like baby gums, had indeed been flagged and had triggered a preliminary inquiry. Who knew? I happened to be, coincidentally, taking a short, doctor-encouraged walk with Sal, who had brought me for a routine follow-up blood test when the officials arrived. We positioned ourselves at a discreet but audibly advantageous distance as Brenda was summoned. "Miss Last Name," the zoning inspector began, his voice dry and devoid of amusement. "We have reports concerning the, unconventional installation of certain geological features along property lines and potential misuse of HOA regulations to harass residents." "And Miss Last Name," the health rep chimed in, her tone even sterner. "The board has received a formal notification regarding an incident involving the impedance of essential medical transport on she consulted her notes, "the 14th of this month. We also received a copy of an email detailing other concerning interactions with residents requiring medical access." Brenda's face was a study in controlled panic. "It was all a misunderstanding, a complete and utter misunderstanding. He didn't look sick. The taxi was, it was an unpermitted commercial vehicle during restricted hours. It's in the bylaws." The health rep fixed her with a stare that could have frozen lava. "Ma'am, the absolute priority for any medical transport, scheduled or emergency, is unimpeded patient access. Full stop. Your HOA bylaws, however passionately enforced, cannot and do not supersede established city and state health access mandates. Frankly, the potential for a lawsuit here, not to mention the negative publicity for Pleasant Vistas, is considerable." Brenda visibly deflated. The clipboard, her scepter of power, hung limply at her side. Princess Fluffybutt, sensing the shift in the power dynamic, let out a small, uncertain yip and tried to crawl under Brenda's skirt. The following week, at a very subdued and sparsely attended HOA meeting, which I watched via a live stream link a gleeful neighbor had anonymously forwarded me, Brenda, reading from a prepared statement in a monotone voice, issued a public apology for her overzealous enforcement of certain bylaws and for any distress caused to Mr. Henderson. She was formally censured by the board and stripped of her leadership of the beautification committee. The Matterhorn speed bumps were, alas, DOA. There was even talk of a recall election. I didn't feel triumphant, exactly. More logistically satisfied, and very, very tired, but it was a good kind of tired. A few days later, Dr. Ramirez was looking at my latest scans, a small smile on his face. "Well, Mikey," he said, "whatever you've been doing for stress relief, it seems to be working. The new chemo regimen is showing excellent results. Tumors are shrinking. Blood work is improving." That's fantastic, Doc," I said, a wave of actual, unadulterated relief washing over me. He peered at me over his glasses. "Indeed. Though I did hear a rather bizarre rumor from a colleague who lives out your way. Something about a rogue pebble garden causing some significant local consternation and a sudden citywide interest in HOA bylaws." I just smiled. "Just a little therapeutic landscaping, Doc. Very good for the soul." Sal pulled up for my next appointment, a regular checkup this time. The sun was shining. "Heard Brenda's trying to sell Learn the Bylaws for fun and profit, pamphlets door to door," Sal said, chuckling as I got in. "Apparently she's trying to fund her legal defense against a rogue squirrel who claims she created a hostile environment. Don't give her any ideas, Sal," I said, but I was grinning. As we drove through Pleasant Vistas, the street was clear. A new, much younger and decidedly timid-looking woman was politely waving at a UPS truck. She even smiled at Sal. The reflective pebble nocturnal safety garden still stood in all its pointy, glittering glory, a monument to a battle won. I leaned back against the seat. "You know, Sal," I said, watching the perfectly manicured, blissfully unobstructed lawns glide by. "For a guy who orchestrates complex transport logistics for a living, I really, really hate unnecessary detours." I paused. "But sometimes You just have to reroute the damn problem right out of your way. My health journey wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the road ahead felt a little smoother. And, I had to admit, a whole lot funnier. A few weeks later, feeling almost human, I was on the phone with Maria, finalizing some transport schedules for a new hospital wing opening. "So, Mikey," she said, her voice laced with amusement, "that formal complaint to the Health Oversight Committee? Just between us, how much of that was actually, formally formal?" I chuckled, a genuine, easy laugh that didn't hurt my ribs. Let's just say my signature looks remarkably official when I use the hospital's specialized high-security letterhead font. And you'd be absolutely astonished, Maria, what a well-placed CC City Council Health and Safety Liaison Office can achieve, even if said liaison happens to be on a 2-week fishing trip incommunicado in Alaska. Maria burst out laughing. "Mikey, you're not just the director of hospital transportation. You're the director of disruptive logistics. A legend." "Someone had to manage the traffic, Maria," I said, a real relaxed smile spreading across my face. "Someone always has to manage the traffic." The pebbles outside my window caught the afternoon sun, gleaming with an annoying, yet deeply satisfying, brilliance. And for once, the road ahead looked wide open.